Okay, recording started. So welcome everyone, whether you're joining us right now or watching this after the fact. My name is Christopher Clark, and I am your Outreach and Engagement Librarian here on campus. And this is another in our series of interviews where basically we talk to cool people about cool things. And today's very cool person is Christopher Golden, who I'm very excited to speak with. So Christopher Golden is the award-winning best-selling author of such novels as Myth Hunters, Wildwood Road, Boys Are Back in Town, The Ferryman, Strangewood, Of Saints and Shadows, with Tim Levin, The Map of Moments. He has written books for teens and young adults, including Poison Ink's Soulless and the thriller series Body of Evidence, which was honored by the New York Public Library and chosen as one of YALSA's best books for young readers. He is known for his many media tie-in works, including novels, comics, and video games in the worlds of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Hellboy, Angel, and X-Men, among others. He was born and raised in Massachusetts, where he still lives with his family, and his original novels have been published in 14 languages in countries around the world. So welcome, Christopher.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to start out by asking, because you have just, even that little bit of bio, obviously it wasn't comprehensive, so it doesn't cover all of the stuff you've done, but you've written all over the place and written across media. So you've got your novels and comic books and video games was in there. I guess I want to start out by asking you a little bit about your background as a writer. How did you get started? Like what media did you start writing in, and how did you kind of make these transitions to various media platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I started writing for real, I guess. As a senior in college, I started my first novel, Of Saints and Shadows. I graduated in 1989. Which was a million lifetimes ago. And I was always a fan of comics, and I was always interested in comics, but I moved to New York in the fall of, I lived there for 3 years, in the fall of '89. And the year 1992 was like a key year for me. So starting in about 1990 or 1991, I was working on my first book, which was not fiction. My first book was an anthology of essays about horror movies by horror writers called Cut. And it actually won the Stoker Award. It was published in 1992 and won the Bram Stoker Award, which obviously was like ruined me for life, because it was all uphill from there. And I sold my first 2 novels also in 1992. The first book was published in 1994. And in 1992 or 1993, I got my first deal to write comics, which was actually an adaptation of Joe Lansdale's novel, The Drive-In. And weirdly, Joe and Dark Horse Comics had a bit of a falling out because the contract specified it be in color. Dark Horse wanted to trim the budget and publish it in black and white. Joe objected and they parted ways, but I'd already written all 4 issues of that comic. So it all kind of happened around the same time as the beginning. And so in the fall of 1992, when I got my first novel deal, I quit my job because at the time I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have kids. I was married, but my wife and I were, sort of free of those kinds of obligations. And I was like, well, if I don't do it now, I will probably never do it. So I quit, and we moved back to Massachusetts, and I dedicated myself to writing and exploring all the different genres and mediums that I was interested in.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You'd mentioned winning the Stoker Award early on and getting your start in horror fiction. Were you always just kind of drawn to genre fiction?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I mean, I started writing when I was relatively young, probably in high school, though a lot of people start writing earlier than that. And I remember at one point, I've told this story many times, my mom saying to me, "Why can't you write something good?" And by good, she meant, why couldn't I write something nice? And I said to her at the time, I've written Western stories and science fiction stories and fantasy stories, but somebody always dies, you know, things always go awry. And so I feel like even though I have written professionally in so many different genres, all of my stuff is sort of layered in with horror and dread. I just loved it as a kid, you know. I mean, the things that made impressions on me early on, you know, I mean, the TV series Kolchak the Night Stalker, I've talked about so much. Tomb of Dracula, my favorite comic from Marvel Comics as a kid. Watching the Twilight Zone, watching, you know, growing up in New England, the local UHF stations had Creature Double Feature, and on Sunday Creature Feature. So my brother and I would watch these monster movies and horror movies that had been released in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And in fact, my son Dan, who's 25, and I have spent this past week rewatching the original Planet of the Apes TV series. Those aren't horror stories, but they are horrific. You know, one of them is horrifically bad, but but the stories themselves have a lot of horror and dread in them. And I guess I just always gravitated toward that stuff. And I think many years ago, Robert McCammon did an interview with Fangoria magazine in which they asked him why horror. And it stuck with me forever because he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, you know, horror is the only genre in which you can talk about anything. You can, you know, you can do you can talk about love and hate and sex and romance and science and the future and the past and whatever you want to talk about. It could be a Western story, it could be whatever, all still encompassed within or under the umbrella of horror. And I also, for me, think that every single person that you know, including you, Christopher, we all have things going on in our lives at all times that are sort of bubbling under and could boil over into a crisis or an emotional issue, or we have regrets, we have whatever. And horror is the best catalyst. You know, if you put anybody into a situation where they're afraid or where something is their lives or things that they love are in jeopardy, it draws out all of those things that are sort of bubbling under our lives day to day. And so for me, putting people in that crisis mode that really reveals who they are and what matters to them is fascinating, you know.
So it kind of sounds like horror almost becomes a way of exploring character, like to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, it not even necessarily, you know, character in general, but unless you mean human character, you know what I mean, like people's character, who they are, how they'll respond. I mean, this is and honestly, in 2020 and 2021, that subject has never been more has never needed more attention than it does now. You know, what does it mean to have character? But as far as being a character, yeah, I mean, I want to put them through the ringer so we can find out who they are, show us their mettle, you know. And I don't know. I also think that I'm basically an atheist, but I do feel I do feel like we all need to believe in something, and I feel like if I can get you for just a second, just a blink of an eye, to believe that there's something that you could construe as being evil, then you have to, in that same blink of an eye, believe that there is some opposite to that, that there is, and whether it's just that there's decency in humans, that we can find that decency, or whether you believe that it's some larger good. I feel like that's worth exploring too. The idea that, the concept. There have been books and comic series that I've abandoned as a reader because I didn't feel like the author or narrator, you get them confused sometimes, gave me any sense that they believed in a moral compass. And I'm no preacher, you know what I mean? Like I have just as much fun as everybody else, but I do believe in a moral compass. I believe that we have responsibilities to one another as people, and put people in the pressure cooker situation in a horror film or horror story, and you discover that moral compass.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. Because folks who know me know that I'm a huge horror fan, and always have been. And so I always had this sense that I couldn't fully articulate of it being just a really deeply moral genre. And I think you explained it perfectly, so that kind of helps clarify that for me. So so I will definitely use that next time I have to explain it to
Feel
some.
free.
And so I kind of wanted to ask um, uh, moving on a slightly different track, and in terms of, so this is a genre you started writing in, and that you've been writing in, and that you're really drawn to. I also wanted to ask in terms of your approach to different types of works. So do do you find that you, Christopher, the writer, work slightly differently when you're working on your own original novels versus like a media tie-in, like with Buffy or something like that, or for you is the process pretty much the same across the board?
I mean, I think structurally the process is usually pretty similar, but so first I would say that what I always express on this topic is that I feel like the original novels are the ones that I'm writing for me, who I am now. And when I write a tie-in novel, I'm usually writing those books for the kid I was. You know what I'm saying? Which I'm not suggesting that adults, there's so many things I'm a geek about, and I'm proud to be a geek, and that's all fine. That's fine. I'm not, but I feel like the purest distillation of what that geekiness is was when I was about 14 years old. You know what I mean? And so when I pursue some of the media tie-in stuff that I pursue, it's to please that kid. As far as the process is concerned, again, I feel like when I'm doing a media tie-in, I am writing to please myself, because I don't accept media tie-in work unless it's something I'm already a fan of. Or that, like, the one time I hadn't played Uncharted when they offered me the Uncharted video game thing, but I immediately educated myself and found that it was comprised of every ingredient that I love was in that thing, and I became a fan of it immediately. And I think you can see that anybody reading that book can see, like, I love all the components there. But when I'm writing the original stuff, I'm immersed in a different part of my brain. When I'm writing the tie-in stuff, I'm writing for legions of me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have this thing I love. I always talk about the fact that when I was a kid, I think some of the people I've been friends with in my life have found this trait endearing, and some of them have wanted to strangle me. But I always want everybody that is around me to love the things that I love. I'm always like, you got to read this, you got to watch this, this is so great. I want everybody to love it. When I was in, like, the third grade, and I would have, like, a peanut butter sandwich at lunch, and I would be like, whoever loves peanut butter, raise your hand. I literally did this. It's so embarrassing to think about, but I did this more than once. I mean, this was not an uncommon thing for me. I wanted everybody to, like, share in my joy in that moment. So when I'm writing a media tie-in, um, I'm like, I love this thing, and I want to create a story with the components that excite me the most, that will get you as excited about it as I am, which is a very different thing from writing an original novel, and what my emotional process is in writing an original novel. There's more exploration in that. There's more adult thought. And I don't, again, like, not that the media times that I've done are not adult, they are, but there's more uh, soul searching that goes on in writing an original novel for me, and in figuring out who those characters are. Whereas with the media tie-in, you're usually working with existing characters, and you're just trying to illustrate for everybody why those characters are so great. It's a very different process in that sense. Structurally, it's the same, but emotionally, it's a different process.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Have you ever had an experience working for a media property where you just kind of, um, I guess, stumbled on something unexpected in the writing part, in terms of like a character, or or an idea, doing something that, like, even you as a fan maybe didn't expect at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens to greater or lesser degrees every time. A couple pop into my head immediately. When I was writing the first X-Men novel I did, which was the first book in the X-Men Mutant Empire trilogy, um, you start to get into the head of the character that you've only ever seen on a comic book page at that time. And I was thinking about Cyclops, and the fact that he always had to wear his ruby quartz visor or glasses. And immediately I realized, oh, Cyclops is colorblind. He literally only sees the world in shades of red. And I was pretty well versed in X-Men at that point. I think I'd read every X-Men comic that had ever been published by then. And I don't think anybody had ever pointed that out before. And I loved that. And just sort of exploring the relationship between him and Jean Grey. And again, I could go really down the rabbit hole with this. But just what their, world kept getting in the way of their relationship, but he definitely felt like they were fated to be together in the end. With Hellboy, I gave him his first romantic interest, and that was sort of a process of discovery too. And then with Angel, for people who were fans of Buffy and Angel, I wrote this short comic book story, and I can't remember, for Dark Horse. I can't remember what it appeared in. I don't think it was in the regular Angel comic. I think it might have been in Dark Horse Presents, like an 8 or 10 page story. And the story was about the fact that we all know, I don't know if you're a fan of Buffy and Angel, but we all knew that Angel, when he's good, still remembers all of the horrible stuff he did when he was Angelus, when he was evil, when he had no soul. But I did this story where, because I was thinking about that, and I did this story where I pointed out that not only does he remember it, but they're good memories. And how because of how he felt at the time that he did all of these horrible things, he relished them, he cherished them. They were exciting and wonderful to him when he murdered all these people and did all and was cruel and tortured people and all this stuff. That even though he's disgusted with those memories, they're good memories, and so his mind associates them with good things. Hold on. I'm sorry about that.
Oh yeah, no worries.
And that makes it so much worse. It's so much more painful to him because they're good. And stuff like that. I think that eventually sort of was incorporated, and I'm not saying it was because of me, but I think that concept did make its way into the show at some point. But yeah, so yeah, you do, when you're really immersing yourself in these um, media worlds, if you're doing it right, you do discover things.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Because some of the things you mentioned aren't necessarily things that I would have um, that I would have thought about, right? In terms of just like watching the show or reading the comic books. Yeah, so I really like that. Um, Kind of branching off of that a little bit, I know another thing that you've mentioned being a really big fan of the team up novel or the team up book, and you've collaborated with several different authors that I've seen. I'm sure there are more. Um, I I guess why are you such a big fan of that format? And then like what is that process like with you? Like actually collaborating with another
Yeah.
writer, you know, or artist or whomever it is. And do you find that like an engaging practice? Can it be kind of frustrating sometimes, right? Because you know, so I guess maybe if you just want to speak on that a little.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason for it is the same thing that I was talking about how I want other people to love the things I love. So when I get excited about something, I want my friends to share that excitement. And when an idea comes in conjunction with someone else, it is exciting to share that idea. So, Jim Moore and I I've written two novellas. We're working on the final novella in this trilogy. The first one is called Bloodstained Oz. And we were on an elevator in New York at a conference when this idea came out in conversation as a joke, and we both went, "Oh my God, we have to write that." And it gets exciting, and you know, um, every collaboration is different. I mean, I've collaborated with so many people, friends of mine, all writers whose work I admired first before I wrote with them. So I've written a lot with Amber Benson and Tom Snagoski and Tim Levin and Mike Mignola and Charlene Harris. Now I'm insulting people. I can't. This is bad. I've just like my brain just went blank. But the thing is that it's more work. I mean, this is the thing that people think like, oh well, you wrote only half the book, so it must be half the work. And that's, in reality, I think it's actually more work to collaborate with someone than to write something on your own. So you have to really want to do it, and you have to really like and respect the person with whom you're collaborating. But it is about that, that sharing your enthusiasm thing.
Yeah, do you find that it sometimes enhances your own creativity, like when you get to work with these other people, right? Because and swapping ideas back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times I think that it's when I was a kid, I grew up on Southern rock in New England was huge as a kid, and Skinner was one of my favorite bands as a kid, and I still love them, but obviously my my tastes have broadened quite a bit since childhood. But I remember reading this Rolling Stone article in which the band was being interviewed, and they talked about being in the studio together and how they had three guitar players, which people would say that's so stupid. They have three lead guitarists. Well, what would happen is that one guitarist would do a lick on a bit of a lead in a song, and that would prompt the next guy to be like, oh, that was cool. Listen to this, and they're feeding off of each other, and they're building something cooler. So when you're writing a novel in a vacuum, you're writing for yourself, and you're writing, for your end reader, right? But when you're collaborating, you're really only writing for your collaborator. You're only writing to entertain that person. So when they send you something that's fun and really interesting and that you love, you want to give something as good or better back to them. So I do think, I mean, I prefer the books that I write myself. I should say the experience. Writing books, collaborate things, it's two different experiences.
Right.
You there?
Yeah, sorry, it cut out just slightly at the end there, but I think we caught what you were saying. I kind of wanted to
Okay.
you'd mentioned talking about you want to basically entertain the person you're collaborating with, and I just really love that idea, especially because in the library world we tend to be so collaborative, right? And I wanted to ask specifically because I know it's related to some stuff that's upcoming and coming out through Dark Horse. Ask about your collaborations with Mike Mignola on Hellboy, and then which has morphed into this new kind of universe that's coming out, that the Outerverse, I think it's called, which I'm really excited about. So maybe if you just want to talk, if you want to talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah. In fact, a week from yesterday, the first issue of Lady Baltimore, The Witch Queens will be in comic shops. Mike and I have actually been working together. We've known each other for 25 years, which blows my mind. We met when I interviewed him for a magazine called Flux Magazine, when Hellboy was just coming out right at the very beginning. And that's a whole other conversation, so I won't go through the whole process of that. But over the years, we've worked on so many things together and have even more stuff coming. But what happened about this vampire graphic novel he was going to do? And then and he never did it. And one day he called and said, I've realized that I'm never going to do that graphic novel. Do you want to do it as a novel? And that became the novel, Baltimore, or The Steadfast Tin Soldier and the Vampire. And it's probably the most beautiful book I've ever done, with 150 or 175 illustrations by Mike, something like that. And he had sort of plotted out about 85% of the book. And I added the other 15% of the story. And that process is different because Mike isn't really a prose writer. He writes comics, but he isn't really a writer of prose. But we worked really closely together, and I would write a section and send it to him. And he would really come back and share with me the vision, like how he saw it in his head. And that was a wonderful process, and ended up with one of the books I'm proudest of in my whole career. And then we did a couple of other books together. We set up Baltimore as a film at New Regency. I wrote the screenplay. The executive changed, and so that never happened at the time. We're pursuing something different now. And during that time, we talked about the fact that we wanted to fill in some of the missing years of Baltimore's life in comics. And that was sort of how the Baltimore comics were born. And then we did something similar with the novel, was Joe Golem and the Drowning City. And that gave birth to the comic book series Joe Golem, Occult Detective. And it was while I was simultaneously doing the two comic book series that we realized really this is one universe, and how the two series were connected and where they would meet. And once that happened, once that trigger happened, the whole thing just blew up organically in our minds. What would happen, the new characters, what it all means, the history from the first spark in the universe of what the Outerverse is, how it's all connected. And we realized that we wanted to have a playing field where all of our concepts and basically all of our major characters could sort of exist simultaneously, because Baltimore takes place in the late teens and 20s of the 20th century, and Joe Golem takes place from the 50s to the 70s of the 20th century. And we wanted to find a place for the concepts to all meet. And that actually is in Lady Baltimore, which takes place in 1938. I can't wait for people to read it because I'm so excited about it. I can't wait.
I'm super excited as well. I actually came to Hellboy through Joe Golem, which was recommended to me by somebody in my Call of Cthulhu group, and I loved it. So I just kind of like, went back and forth between that and some other stuff in the Hellboy universe. So I'm really excited. So we have a question from Matt here. So I want to take a look at this. So Matt asks, speaking of relationships between superheroes, overlapping media, Marvel witches, etc., if you have time and if it's appropriate. Oh yeah, so yes, Matt, I will ask him. What do you think about WandaVision?
Listen, WandaVision is fascinating. First of all, I loved it. So let's just set that aside. But what I think is most fascinating about WandaVision is that it is such a weird thing. It's such a strange piece of entertainment that I'm stunned that so many people I know in my real life who never watch, or maybe they've seen a couple of Marvel Universe movies, they've seen a couple of MCU films, started watching WandaVision, were intrigued by it but didn't understand it, and went back and binge watched all the Marvel movies so they could understand this really, really weird thing that isn't really made for, like, if you said to me, hey, listen, the Marvel movies as they are not accessible enough to the general public. So we're going to make this thing that is dense and confusing and not really accessible at all to the general public. And that's the thing that's going to prompt tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, Matt is agreeing, who didn't have any interest really in the larger MCU. This thing is going to be the thing that makes people go watch all these movies those movies are made for mass audiences. WandaVision was a niche show, and yet somehow the niche show became the thing that blew up. It blows my mind. And then the other thing about it that kills me is I was worried about coronavirus and its impact on Black Widow, because people were excited about Black Widow, but everybody's confused about what exactly it is. Is it only a prequel? Does Natasha become resurrected at the end, or does her sister just become Black Widow? And that level of sort of like, and I was really worried about what would happen to Black Widow, because it's going to actually be released in movie theaters in May. And a lot of people won't be vaccinated yet by then, and the world will still be trying to shake off the rust that's accumulated over the past year. But I think that WandaVision, the excitement of WandaVision, and now tomorrow night Falcon and the Winter Soldier starts, I think the excitement of that is going to wipe away any problems Black Widow might have incurred because of the delay and coronavirus. It's crazy that this show would be the thing. It's nuts.
That's so awesome. Thank you so much. So I kind of wanted to build on that, because you just the excitement around things like WandaVision, and things like the Outerverse and all of this, like, and you'd mentioned earlier just being one of those people who just really loves sharing the things that you're excited about with other people.
As you can see right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any like kind of touchstone like works or authors or comic books or novels or movies or whatever that for you have been really I guess key to helping you develop as a writer, or something that just like has super inspired you? You mentioned creature features earlier, but I'm
Yeah, I mean, so many at so many different points in my life, right? Even now, and I'll share the now with you in a minute. But again, as a kid, it was Kolchak the Night Stalker, huge for me, formative, absolutely. My dad was not the best dad in the world, but he would, when I was little. So Kolchak had been on in I think '75. I was, oh no, wait, whatever it was. I think I was 8. I'd have to go back and look, but um, it was only on for a year, and then the year after it was on, it was repeated at 11 o'clock at night. So my dad I'd go to sleep at my regular bedtime, and my dad would wake me up every night for those 20 episodes to watch Kolchak the Night Stalker. Not because he gave a shit about it; he couldn't care less about the show, but he knew I loved it so much, and that was a gift that he never realized he was giving me, because that was a huge formative experience for me. And then it probably also was responsible for some nightmares, but that was totally fine. Nightmares are also useful. Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's a huge influence for me. And Tomb of Dracula, I mentioned the comics from Marvel. Over the course of my life, Stephen King, huge influence, of course. But there are so many. Joe Lansdale is one of my favorite authors. I'll never write like Joe Lansdale, but the sincerity and the humor of Joe Lansdale, gets me. I get it. Larry Mcmurtry. I don't write Westerns, but I freaking love Larry Mcmurtry, and Lonesome Dove is one of my favorite novels of all time. John Irving. A Prayer for Owen Meany is probably tied for my favorite novel with Stephen King's The Stand. Dennis Lehane wrote his first Kenzie Gennaro book as A Drink Before the War. And the way that the two main characters are woven through their community in the book, the community where they grew up and now they're adults in that community, was hugely influential on me. The humor in Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse books and the sort of brassiness of the characters in that, big influence on me. Love Charlene. God, I'm like, there's so many that I could go through. Currently, weirdly, one of my big influences, I'd started this a few years ago, but it's gotten much better / worse during COVID, which is that every morning with my tea, I watch about 20 minutes of an old movie. I DVR them off Turner Classic Movies. And I've always loved old movies, but in the last 6 years, and especially in the last year and a half, I've immersed myself in these old movies. And I have to say that the storytelling and the kinds of melodrama in those stories has really inspired me, because it's so different from the way we tell stories now. That, I mean, obviously there's a lot of objectionable stuff in the old films. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the heightened sort of sense of melodrama, the way people fall in love in 6 hours in old movies. You know what I mean? They met and they're in love and wanting to get married 12 hours later, So I've had a lot of imaginative conversations with myself about story and structure and stuff like that based on that. So it never stops, and there's so many times that I've run across authors whose work excites me, and every time that happens, I get inspired. Sarah Langard's new novel, Good Neighbors, inspired me. Michael Corrida's novels inspired me. When he did his first horror novel, So Cold the River, I think that was the first. No, it wasn't the first one, but it's the first one I read. I mean, I could go on, and there are a million movies and TV shows and all that stuff, because I'm a child of television and all of that. But, I don't know. There's just so much richness to draw from. I don't know. I mean, God, I'm trying to think of the name of Lauren Bucas. Love her books, The Shining Girls and stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
Carol O'Connell wrote, is not that well known, and she really should be. She wrote a series of detective novels about a character named Mallory, who's a sociopath. She's a detective, a police detective, who's raised by a police detective, and she doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong, but she makes her decisions about right and wrong based on what she thinks her adoptive father would think or her adoptive mother would think. She's lost them both, but so she has no moral compass of her own really, but she's just like decides what she wants to do based on what they would think about the situation. Fascinating. So again, like there's so many.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing those. I've mentioned this before, but book and movie recommendations are like catnip for librarians, so they're appreciated. Um, I, I,
Matt's making a list.
I'm really glad that you brought up Kolchak, because the funny thing is, my dad also introduced me to Kolchak via DVD, because I was a huge X-Files kid, just super into
Yeah.
X-Files, and he's like, you know,
Your dad wanted to show you where it came from.
yeah, and it was like, if you dig this, like check these out, and yeah, I loved them, so good. I wanted to we just have a little bit of time left. I wanted to ask kind of start move back to a little bit where we started and ask about some of your original work, novels, outside of media tie-ins or collaborations.
Mhm.
What are you working on now? Like, what are some recent books or things that you've done that you're particularly proud of, or just
Yeah.
excited to talk about?
I've been really happy with sort of the run of the last 6 or 7 years. Uh, I did a book called Snowblind that sort of changed things about with the way that I was approaching what I was doing and the kind of characters that I was writing. Um, and I wrote a novel called Ararat that won the Bram Stoker Award for Best Novel that year. Um, and that introduced the world to this character called Ben Walker. And Walker was never intended to be an ongoing character. He was a part of an ensemble. And the publisher loved him so much, and the readers seemed to really love him so much that he prompted two other novels that have come since then. The second one was called The Pandora Room, and the third one that came out just this past December was called Red Hands. And Red Hands was really exciting too, because it was the first Walker story to take place in the United States. Unfortunately, it's about contagion and came out during coronavirus, but I think it's gone over pretty well in spite of that. Excuse me. And my next novel is called Road of Bones. I've talked about it very little so far because it hasn't been put up on the publisher's page yet. But it's a standalone horror novel set in Siberia, and it'll be out in January, and I'm super excited about it. I've had already some nice words of support, including from Stephen King, who loved it, and man, that's nice. That's you can't ask for anything better than to get his blessing. So I'm super excited about that.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's in January of 22, you said?
Yeah, it'll be January of 2022. And Red Hands just came out. Oh, and the key thing about the Ben Walker books is that they do sort of take place in a chronological order, but you don't need to read them in any order. They're all three standalone novels that I'm just, yeah. Red Hands, I'm so happy with the way that book came out and the characters. So
That's fantastic. So I have one more question, and then if you have any questions that you want to throw into the chat real quick as we wrap things up, please feel free to do so. But I did want to ask, just because it's been brought up a few times, kind of as the background we're all kind of working under, how Do you feel like working as a writer in the pandemic, has it changed like the way you write? Has it or I guess maybe given you like new perspectives or anything you'd like to share in terms of that?
Um, interestingly, I think that for so many writers, lots of writers have had a difficulty putting words on a page. And I would say that's been somewhat true, but not in the way that I'm seeing so many other writers talk about. And a lot of people have found it difficult to focus on anything during this time. And thankfully, that's not been uh, an issue. Part of that for me, I think, is that, to be honest, my mom had been very ill during the whole thing with COPD and dementia, and she passed away a few weeks ago. And I think that my focus was so diverted with trying to do my work and visit her and sort of deal with the insurance and doctors and all of that stuff that I might have been focused less on coronavirus than a lot of people. But I think now, and a lot of writers felt, I think, that when this first started, not just writers, creative people, artists, writers, people who typically are at home and content to be at home and maybe seem like extroverts but are actually introverts, we're kind of fine at first. You know what I mean? I know for me, I was fine. But within the last 2 months, I'm done. I'm just like, get me out of here. Like when I'm sick of watching movies, that that's a problem. You know what I mean? I'm just like, enough. Just like, and I think it was because of the winter too. You know what I mean? Like when you could still go and eat at an outdoor restaurant, maybe depending on how bad things were at the time. But over the winter, there was no way in hell I was going to eat inside a restaurant. Not a chance. And yeah, but writing wise, Road of Bones is a pretty claustrophobic novel, and I think that definitely helped, or it helped me write claustrophobia to be in this situation. So
That's fantastic. I'm super excited to check that out because that was one of my go-to quarantine movies was rewatching The Thing and be like, it could be worse. So
well, yeah, I mean, honestly, Ararat is hugely influenced by The Thing. Is somebody asked me recently what my favorite horror movie was of all time, and it's tough to pick one because it becomes a long conversation about era and type. But if I have to pick one, it's got to be The Thing. Carpenter's The Thing. And I certainly think that it's a huge influence on that book, on Ararat. So, and I've written, this is the third book I've written that is focused on the cold climes, Snowblind, Ararat, and now Road of Bones. Because in my imagination, you're scared and alone and cold and afraid of what's to come, if you're out there on your own. And I don't know, that's just, a scary environment for me. So
do you feel like that like writing about those things and those I guess those fears and stuff, does that help you feel more resilient in a way, or
I don't know. I guess just the same way I like to share my enthusiasms, I like to share my dread. Stephen King used to write about the 10 bears, the list of the 10 things that really scared him. And I think that, again, Jack London was a huge influence on me. And those stories, To Build a Fire, Call of the Wild, White Fang, and The Sea Wolves, which is not set in cold climates. But those kinds of survival stories are all a part of, one of my favorite movies of the last X number of years is a movie called The Gray with Liam Neeson, which is a stupid movie. It's ridiculous. It's so stupid. But I love it because it's a, it's a survival story about a guy who crashes in a plane on a mountaintop, covered with hungry wolves, and then has to fight his way through the pack of hungry wolves to get off the mountain alive. The snowy frozen mountain. And if you think that sounds like a good time, you're right. So
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. I could easily keep talking to you for several more hours, but I want to be mindful of your time, and
I appreciate it.
I appreciate you sharing your enthusiasms with us and your dreads. And I wanted to just end here by giving you a chance to, and I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, but just mention anything that you would like people to check out, ways that we can support your work, or check out what you're doing next.
Yeah, I would say that Red Hands is the latest novel, and I encourage everybody to read that. I'm really proud of it and had such a good time writing it. The first issue of Lady Baltimore with Mike Mignola and me comes out next week in comic book shops. And I guess the other thing I would say, I have a website, christophergolden.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, although I hardly ever use Instagram. And I don't know. I would say that if you are interested in my work and you're supportive of what I do, then I hope that you will also focus on educating yourself and finding more marginalized voices than mine, and lifting those voices up as well, and investigating the work of those authors. Because if you're interested in my stuff, this is what I'm passionate about. So check out the best book I read last year was Blacktop Wasteland by a crime writer named S.A. Cosby. Fantastic book. Check out The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, and Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and so much more. That's part of my passion too. And if you want to share my enthusiasms, that's one of them.
Awesome. We will post the links to all of those, including some of those recommendations, in the video description for this video when it goes live on our library YouTube. So definitely encourage folks to check that out. I know that we have at least a few of those titles in the library, and we will work on filling out the collection for those we don't. But yeah, Christopher, thank you so much for joining us. It was a delight, and best of luck with your work and with the Outerverse and everything else you're working on.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for your question, Matt.